I analyzed 50 IGN reviews, IGN's framework for reviews, and the entire industry surrounding them. And you know what I found? They're biased. They're biased as heck, although in different ways than you might think. I'm Peach, welcome to the pit, and let's get right into it. Oh, IGN, widely considered to be the biggest gaming journalism company in the world, but yet also one of the most hated and made fun of. IGN is known for articles and news surrounding all things gaming and the entire gaming industry. But one of the standout core pillars of IGN is their reviews. Originally called Imagine Games Network, they've been in business since 1996, and because of that have published thousands of reviews for games in a litany of genres. Through their widespread journalism, large network of reviewers, and close access to key industry stakeholders, IGN has positioned itself as the go-to source for journalistic game reviews. And when I say journalistic, I mean somebody that is employed as a journalist or at a traditional media company like IGN. I'm not including many YouTube reviewers that have far eclipsed the reach of IGN reviews. But as far as traditional and written article reviews go, IGN is still the top source. But yet, every once in a while, and what feels like with increased occurrences, IGN reviews get held up as the prime example of the growing divide between critics and gamers. Oftentimes, they can completely misrepresent how players actually feel about a game and bring into the conversation questions of journalistic integrity. As a channel whose core focus is on marketing in the games industry, I thought it was time to take a look at one of the most important and powerful pieces of games marketing: the reviews. And what better source to analyze than the poster boy of corporate game reviews, IGN. For this video, I decided to analyze 50 game reviews from 15 different IGN reviewers, ensuring a wide variety of opinions and perspectives, but still allowing me to see the style of each journalist across their reviews. Other than a few notable controversial examples, I picked the reviews completely at random. The only things I ensured were that they encompassed a wide variety of genres, platforms, and different years of release. This allowed me to see on some scale the effect that differences between people, time periods, and the style of game itself have on the review. And what I found was quite interesting and surprised me in many different ways. In order to properly organize this video so I don't go all over the place, I've divided it into 4 key sections. The first is looking at IGN as an organization. This includes their review scale, core philosophies, and basically why they do what they do. After that, I get into the reviewers themselves and how they approach reviewing a game, followed by an analysis of the industry, and then what it all means for us as consumers. IGN has a multitude of incredibly diverse reviewers that come from all sorts of different backgrounds. And since games are an art form, the experience of how a game can make someone feel or how a story is perceived is fairly subjective. But there are certain objective characteristics that games have that allow you to easily compare one to another. Are there bugs? Are there new and innovative gameplay mechanics? How are the graphics? How much content is offered? And many more like these. This is the purpose of creating a framework that allows for general consistency in reviews. And this is where a scoring system comes into play. Because there are subjective aspects of games that can be hard to quantify, and there are a lot of objective aspects that can be more easily quantified, a scoring system provides different opinionated reviewers with some much needed guidelines that make comparing games from different genres much easier. Because a scoring system is basically just a comparison system. I only know this game is a 10 out of 10 because it's noticeably better than other games I've played, or because it has the same quality and makes me feel the same way another 10 out of 10 game does. For most of its existence, IGN has used a 100-point scale, but as of 2020, they have permanently switched over to a 10-point system, with each point correlating to a single word objective that best describes the game. A 10 equals a masterpiece, an 8 means the game is great, a 6 is okay, and so on and so forth. With this new framework, there's no longer a 6.5, it's either a 6 or it's a 7. There's no 4.3, there's no 9.1, you get the idea. The reason for shifting to a 10-point system was to make it simpler, and to quote IGN, rather than creating unnecessary debate and argument over the distinction between small increments and prompting readers to attempt to reverse engineer the meaning of a single point difference, the round number scores relate to a firm statement that's clearly defined. They also said that pretty much everybody understands the 10-point system intuitively. To which I say, when did a 5 out of 10 become mediocre and not average? I personally don't find that part intuitive at all. But I digress. So with this framework for reviews created, the next thing is what games are you going to review? IGN is a business after all with limited resources. They can't review everything and they need to get clicks. A former IGN employee and reviewer, Alana Pierce, mentioned in a video recently that because most video games that release don't have a fraction of the complexity or functionality of AAA games, most of the 1 to 5 portion of IGN's scale is dedicated to those games. She points out how if you take a game like Star Wars Outlaws, which many would consider lower on the scale, and put it up against a game that doesn't have music, is super buggy, or doesn't have any complex systems, it would make sense that it would get categorized differently. Hence why AAA games and games that are fully complete and have more complex systems are then more reserved for the 5 to 10 portion of the scale. This, however, creates the first major problem with IGN reviews. Because they need clicks, they have to focus on games more likely to be popular and have people searching for the reviews. This means that they'll have a heavier preference towards AAA games, which makes sense. These games have bigger budgets and marketing pushes, which makes more gamers aware of them and look for reviews, ultimately driving up the traffic for IGN. But if the bottom half of the rating scale is reserved more for broken games or simpler games with missing features, instantly the entire scale has just been skewed. The review preference will be focused on bigger AAA games, and the scale will be shifted towards the 5 to 10 range. Right off the hop, this makes nearly half of the 10-point scale largely irrelevant. And I suspect that this is why there are so many 7 out of 10 reviews. 7 is essentially the new average, and it's a way to say the game isn't great without angering the publishers, which I'll talk more about later. But as IGN has said, scores are just a baseline for our opinion. All reviews go through a stringent editing process for fairness, transparency, and accuracy by the time they finally appear on IGN. So even though the scale is shifted, it's still just a baseline for the reviewer's opinion, and IGN's framework ensures that the reviews are fair and accurate. And here is where the biggest problem of this scale comes into play that I'll dive into in the next section. IGN's scoring system seems to have very little structure for creating consistency across the reviews. That allows the reviewer's opinion to dominate the score. As I mentioned, I read 50 reviews from 15 different reviewers, new and old. And the first thing I found that I think might be the root cause of why a lot of people take issue with IGN is that IGN has given these reviewers incredible autonomy. First off, review lengths will generally range from 1,000 to 4,000 words. Right off the bat, this creates an incredible inconsistency in how detailed a review can be. Some reviews would only cover brief overviews of games, while others would go into minute detail on all of the game's systems. It's fully up to the discretion of the reviewer. Whenever I clicked onto a review, I would have no idea about how much information the reviewer was going to give me. And many reviews I walked away from made me feel like I didn't get a clear picture on what the game truly offers. IGN also has a policy that encourages reviewers to fully finish games. But from what I could tell, they could also choose not to if the game is taking too long or simply too hard. One review in particular openly admitted that they didn't even finish the game because it would take too long to beat. Additionally, there didn't seem to be any guidelines about how much time to spend playing multiplayer games or if they have to go through all the features the game offers. One multiplayer-focused game got the review score lowered because a lot of the characters and weapons had to be unlocked, and the reviewer couldn't play ranked until they reached a certain level, which based on their estimation would take about 10 hours. But they never mentioned if they actually played that long and experienced ranked or some of the other unlockable content. This is a big issue and very inconsistent. Some reviewers would mention they spent 15 hours playing multiplayer, others 25, but most didn't say how long they played. And one review in particular admitted that they only played 2 single short matches. And I totally understand, if you get an early review copy, sometimes you won't be able to experience much of the multiplayer for the simple reason that there aren't many people playing before the launch. But because these reviewers don't for sure have to finish a game or have a set amount of time that they need to spend in the multiplayer, as a potential customer, I don't know if they're giving me an educated opinion based on the whole experience, or if there are entire sections they haven't even touched. And looking at the authors themselves, I discovered something that I didn't expect. And what I had was a relatively small sample size, so I can't confirm this across the entire organization, but there seemed to be a difference between the reviewers back in the early 2010s and the reviewers now. That being, back then, IGN had people that were solely dedicated to reviews, reviewing a new game every few days to a week. Whereas now, they have employees that perform other jobs and do reviews on the side every few months. This includes social commerce producers, game guide editors, database managers, and so many other positions that you wouldn't traditionally associate with reviewing games. To add on to that, IGN also uses a lot of freelance writers to review games as well. So this means that now, whenever you click on a review from IGN, you're not getting an opinion from somebody whose job it is to review games, you're getting an opinion from some random person in the game industry that also reviews games on occasion. And while some of these reviewers would clearly have favorite genres that they do the bulk of their reviews in, they'd also play seemingly random games from any genre. For example, one reviewer had a specialty in action RPGs and fantasy games and reviewed countless games in those genres, but then decided to review an FPS horror. And I'm not gatekeeping, you can review whatever the heck you want. But it just seems odd to me to have somebody review a game in a specific genre that they don't tend to play or at the very least review. In the same video I mentioned earlier, Alana Pierce said that people at IGN get to sign up for what games they want to review. And it's incredibly apparent while going through these reviews that there aren't dedicated reviewers that are the go-to for specific genres or series. And again, everybody's welcome to play and review whatever games they want. But there were a couple of times when I was going through a review that I would get the feeling that this writer had never really played this style of game before. Which, if that is the case, maybe not the best choice for that particular game. Or they could come at it from the perspective of somebody that isn't really familiar with the game or series and just take the game at face value. But the biggest core factor I found while going through all these reviews is that the reviewers are actually human. And as humans, we all have our biases and subjective opinions. And as I've mentioned before, games as an art form has a lot of subjective aspects to it. And as I also mentioned, the authors have incredible autonomy, which allows their subjective opinions to overshadow the positives or negatives of the game based on how the reviewer felt. Let me give you a clear-cut example of what I mean. Cyberpunk 2077 was rated a 9 out of 10, with the only downside being a lot of bugs and glitches. They mentioned if you want a more polished experience, you should probably wait 6 months to a year. The Master Chief Collection on release was also rated a 9 out of 10, with them saying in the review that they don't recommend buying the game if you want to play multiplayer because it doesn't work very well. But yet for other games that are riddled with bugs and broken or missing features, this plays heavily into the final score. Remember when I mentioned that the bottom half of the scale is reserved for those games? Why is a game scored a 9 out of 10 on launch if half of it doesn't work? Because of a pretty loose rating system that is subject to the whims of the reviewer, reviews and their critiques simply don't line up. There were many reviews where, based on what the writer wrote, should have been given a much lower score because of the abundance of negative aspects, or the polar opposite where the score is lower than it should be based on the lack of negative aspects. But the writer gives a score less on a consistent framework and more on their personal feelings about the game. This is especially apparent when you compare IGN reviews for the same game written by another reviewer in a different language. One notable example is the main review for Dragon Age The Veilguard, which was scored a 9 out of 10. But when you look at the Brazilian and Italian versions of the review with different authors, they both scored it at a 7.5. And while these versions of the website are handled by separate companies, they still operate under the banner of IGN and showcase the contrasting opinions that different reviewers can have that affect the score. A couple of the reviewers I looked at would also specifically critique a game based on how it aligned with their particular worldview or their personal identity. And hey, everybody is entitled to their own worldview, opinions, and identity. But the danger of this is it feels like the review is written specifically for people that think like the author. And that notion immediately removes any kind of general objectivity out of the review and puts up a barrier for people with differing perspectives. As I've mentioned, there's no way to be completely objective about a game. As a visual medium, there's going to be a lot of elements that make it hard to assign a score to. But I think where IGN has issues is they allow the reviewer to be too subjective about the game. This leads to wildly different lengths of reviews, a lack of strong criteria for how to approach the different features of a game, very little frame of reference for what each score means and how they stack up to other games, an absence of dedicated reviewers, and a heavy influence of personal bias. In my opinion. Please don't hurt me, IGN. But what is the big deal with reviews? Why does the integrity of the review matter, and why do the scores matter if they're just somebody's opinion? Well, they matter because they do affect sales. Buyers go through a journey when they're deciding to make a purchase. A crucial step before a buyer makes a final decision is when they're collecting information about the product. Reviews are an essential piece of that information collecting. It allows the player to know how the game stacks up to other games, what are the issues, what does it excel at, and if it might be fun. Reviews educate the player on if the game is a worthy purchase and if they should spend their hard-earned money on it. Because of this, good reviews can make or break the launch of a game. If a developer knows ahead of time that their game will be rated poorly, they'll place down a review embargo to prevent any reviews from being released before the launch of the game. This allows the developer to maximize their day one sales because there won't be a public consensus on if the game is good or not. Publishers will even do internal mock reviews during the development of the game to see how it would do, and then based on the result of that, they then have time to adjust aspects of the game to try and get a higher score. All of this to say, game companies care about getting a great review for their game. They care a lot, so much so that some publishers will promise their developers bonuses if their game can achieve high enough review scores. Famously, Obsidian Entertainment was denied their bonuses after Fallout New Vegas received an 84 on Metacritic instead of an 85. Not only that, but there have also been issues with some publishers who have pressured and threatened to reduce or outright cut off advertising money on some of these game journalist sites because of their review scores. One example of this is Sony allegedly threatened GameSpot over a poor score given to one of the Ratchet & Clank games. Additionally, a GameSpot editorial director was even fired over giving a low score to Kane & Lynch back in 2007. Game publishers are very powerful companies. They want good reviews for their games so they can increase their sales and slowly take over the planet. Because of this, there is a lot of pressure put on game journalists, whether this pressure is even perceived or not, to not piss off the cabal of publishers. Not only is there pressure put on the company at large over things such as ad spend, but there's also more insidious pressure pushed on the individual journalists through what is called access journalism. Access journalism is pretty much what it sounds like. Journalism that prioritizes access over journalistic objectivity and/or integrity. In politics, this looks like being able to get media time and exclusive access with influential and powerful people. In gaming, this looks like being able to get media time and exclusive access with influential and powerful publishers. This includes being sent review copies, being invited to private gaming events, interviews with key industry leaders, and so much more. But being able to retain these perks and benefits requires strong relationships with the publishers. If Bethesda and Ubisoft simply don't like you, they will blacklist you from getting early copies of their game for review, cut off your access to the game creators, and ignore any requests for comments on news stories. And this scenario is exactly what happened to Kotaku in 2015. And a similar event happened to them back in 2007 when Sony cut off their access as well. And these are just a couple of examples out of many, including tons of YouTubers that have also been blacklisted from publishers based on their reviews and opinions. Publishers don't want bad press, and they don't want bad reviews because it can hurt their game or their company. If I'm EA and I'm going to send out a review copy and I'm deciding between two different people to send it to, I'm going to pick the person that always consistently writes a positive review over one that's hit or miss, so it gives my game the best possible chance for success. And this creates a vicious cycle. A publisher gives priority access to a journalist they know has a higher chance of being favorable. Then the journalist benefits greatly from this priority access, so they're more inclined, whether consciously or unconsciously, to be more favorable to the publisher. And this favorability and access comes out in many different ways. Recently, Ubisoft flew out YouTubers and other influencers to a special event that included VIP Disneyland trips, interviews with lead developers, and exclusive game time with Star Wars Outlaws just mere weeks before the game's release. The entire purpose of this is a marketing push to influence the YouTubers' opinions of the game in Ubisoft, so that way they're more likely to make positive videos and good press, which in turn will allow Ubisoft to sell more copies. And even just something as small as getting sent a review copy can influence the opinion towards the game. Personally speaking, and I'm sure many people can relate to this, I have a very different opinion towards a game if I get it for free or free with Game Pass or PlayStation Plus, versus if I shell out $120 for the Super Ultimate Day 1 Digital Deluxe Edition. There is a cognitive bias that all of us have called loss aversion, where the emotional impact of a loss is felt more intensely than the joy of an equivalent gain. This essentially means that I'm going to have much stronger emotions if I lose $10 than if I gain $10. And this directly applies towards purchasing a product. We want to know that what we spend our money on is worth it so we don't experience loss. If I spend $60 on a game that only takes me 3 hours to beat, I'm going to be much more negative towards that game than if it got sent to me for free. Because we have to lose something to gain a product, we develop a strong connection to it, whether positive or negative. And this was something I noticed when going through the IGN reviews. Price was never mentioned, which in fairness does allow the reviewer to be more useful long term when the price fluctuates and allows the reviewer to be more objective about the game since they don't have any money on the line. But the negative is it creates a disconnect between the reviewer and the gamers who do have to put their money on the line, have loss aversion, and want to see that they get their money's worth. Price is a critical factor on if a game is worth it. And that just gets thrown onto the pile of the many things I've mentioned in this video that contributes to the growing disconnect between traditional reviewers like IGN and the players. So with all that information, where do we go from here? I think your best bet is to find a reviewer whose opinion you value and who provides really strong information about the game you're interested in. As I discussed earlier, IGN has a ton of different reviewers with a ton of different opinions. And IGN's scoring structure is so very inconsistent that you're not getting IGN's review, you're getting some random guy's review. And to top it all off, most current IGN reviewers don't review games all that often. At least the ones I looked at. Because of that, I think you should be looking elsewhere for your primary reviews. But above all else, I think it's important to recognize that reviews are just another piece of that information gathering before making a purchase. And oftentimes, they're a bit of a marketing tool for the publishers. Hear what the reviewers have to say, watch some gameplay, hear the positives and the negatives, and don't automatically assume that the score a reviewer gives a game is going to be the score you'd give it. Recognize that reviewers, like all people, aren't immune from biases. And keep in mind that some of them do get preferential treatment which could affect their perspective. You should simply collect as much information as possible so you can make an informed purchase decision. And for IGN, I think they need to make stronger scoring and writing guidelines to create more consistency across their different reviewers. When I go to IGN for a review, I should be trusting that the score represents IGN's official viewpoint and has gone through a rigorous and exhaustive review process, and not just some random employee's opinion. But hey, that's marketing. If you like the video, slap subscribe and check out one of the videos on screen for more fabulous content. And until next time, stay peachy.